The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a palpable energy that went beyond the usual pre-flight jitters. This wasn't going to be just another flight. This was Flight 247 from Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport to Newark, and something extraordinary was about to unfold. What began as a simple act of kindness by Barron Trump, when he offered his first-class seat to an elderly veteran, would soon cascade into a series of revelations, leaving the entire plane in stunned, silent awe. Among the throngs of travelers, a young man sat quietly, in first class, a familiar face trying to blend into the background. Barron Trump, now a teenager towering over 6 feet, was engrossed in a hardcover book, his demeanor suggesting a desire for anonymity. Yet, the name on his boarding pass made that an impossibility. Across the aisle, in the economy section, an elderly man, probably in his late 70s, shuffled slowly to his seat. His silver hair was neatly combed, his back slightly stooped, his movements deliberate. He clutched a worn leather duffel bag and his boarding pass. The man's military jacket, adorned with faded patches and medals, whispered tales of service and sacrifice. Passengers exchanged glances. Some whispered, wondering about his past. Others simply admired his quiet dignity. He settled near the rear, wedged between a chatty businessman and a restless toddler. Flight attendants bustled through the aisles, ensuring everyone was seated. Just as the cabin door was about to close, a ripple of tension surged through the air. The veteran's seatmate had become visibly upset, insisting he needed a different seat. The veteran, apologizing profusely for the inconvenience, unintentionally drew Barron's attention. Barron watched the scene unfold, his brow furrowing in thought. Then, without a word, he pressed the call button. "Excuse me," he said softly when the attendant arrived. "Can I switch seats with the gentleman in the military jacket?" The flight attendant blinked, momentarily stunned. Passengers in first class looked up, their curiosity piqued. The young Trump's offer was unexpected, a stark contrast to a world where privilege often went unchallenged. But his expression was earnest, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Let me check," she replied, her voice carrying a note of surprise, and she walked briskly towards the back. As Barron stood to grab his bag, murmurs in first class grew louder. A woman across the aisle leaned in. "You don't have to do that, you know. You paid for this seat," she said, confusion coloring her voice. Barron simply smiled and shrugged. Some people deserve it more. What happened next would forever alter the atmosphere of the flight. The flight attendant returned, her expression a mix of curiosity and admiration. "He said he'd be happy to switch," she informed Barron, her voice slightly trembling. It wasn't every day someone voluntarily gave up a first-class seat, let alone a teenager with a name that commanded attention. Barron nodded politely, grabbing his bag and making his way down the narrow aisle. Passengers whispered, some nudging each other, confirming what they were seeing. A few even surreptitiously snapped photos. Barron seemed unaffected, his focus solely on the man now seated near the back. When Barron arrived, the elderly veteran looked up, confusion etched on his face. "Are you sure, young man?" he asked, his voice weathered but firm. "You don't have to do this for me." "I want to," Barron replied, extending a hand. "Thank you for your service. Please, take my seat." The veteran hesitated, then slowly stood, shaking Barron's hand firmly. "Well, thank you. That's mighty kind of you." As the veteran made his way to first class, the murmurs grew. A young mother in row 15 whispered to her teenage daughter, "Did you see that? He just gave up his seat." The businessman next to Barron raised an eyebrow, muttering, "Never seen anything like that on a flight." Barron slid into the now vacant economy seat, adjusting his tall frame to the tighter space. He seemed completely at ease, ignoring the stares. A flight attendant discreetly asked if he needed anything, but Barron simply shook his head and reopened his book. In first class, the veteran settled into the plush seat, visibly overwhelmed by the comfort and unexpected kindness. He adjusted the armrest, his hands trembling slightly. A flight attendant offered him a complimentary drink and a warm blanket. "The young man said you should have this seat," she explained. The veteran smiled faintly. "It's been years since I've been treated like this," he murmured. He glanced back towards economy, where Barron sat, now absorbed in his book. The gesture, small in action, was monumental in its impact. For a moment, the cabin seemed to exhale. The tension of boarding dissipated. Passengers settled in, and the plane taxied onto the runway. But as the engines roared to life, lifting the flight into the air, the story was far from over. What seemed like a simple act of kindness was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. And then the veteran spoke. The flight reached cruising altitude, the soft hum of the engines filling the cabin. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, offering refreshments, but the atmosphere was anything but routine. Passengers couldn't stop glancing between Barron Trump in economy and the elderly veteran now seated in first class. Whispers of admiration had spread, but the story was only just beginning to unfold. The veteran sat quietly at first, sipping his water, staring out of the window. His hands rested on his lap, a faint tremor visible. Then, as if compelled by the weight of the moment, he turned to the passenger seated next to him, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "I have to say something," he began, his voice just loud enough to be heard. The woman looked at him, curious. The veteran adjusted the small pin on his lapel, a purple heart, and sighed deeply. "That young man who gave me this seat, his family saved my life once." The woman blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" The veteran leaned back, his voice growing steadier as he began his story. "It was decades ago during the Vietnam War. I was stationed overseas, far from home, no family support. I'd been injured badly, shot twice in the leg. When I finally got stateside, I was lost. No direction, no purpose. Nothing." His voice wavered, but he continued. "I ended up in New York, trying to rebuild my life. I didn't have a place to stay, barely enough money for food. One day, I ran into a man outside a diner who saw me struggling. He didn't just hand me $1 and walk away. He sat with me and listened to my story. That man was Donald Trump's father, Fred." The woman's eyes widened, and a few nearby passengers who had been subtly eavesdropping leaned closer. "Fred Trump?" she asked. The veteran nodded, his expression growing wistful. "Yes, he didn't owe me a thing, but he made sure I had a roof over my head and a job to get back on my feet. He never asked for anything in return, just told me, 'You served this country. It's the least we can do.'" I'll never forget those words. By now, the conversation had caught the attention of several passengers in first class, and the story began to ripple through the cabin. The veteran's voice grew stronger, his eyes misting with gratitude. "I always wanted to thank his family, but I never got the chance. Life moved on, and I thought the moment was lost forever. And now, today, that man's grandson. He's given me a gift I'll never forget. What are the odds of something like this happening?" In economy, Barron sat oblivious to the growing buzz. He was engrossed in his book, his long legs awkwardly tucked into the cramped space. But in first class, the veteran's revelation had sparked something deeper. Passengers began to exchange glances, murmurs of amazement spreading like wildfire. One of the flight attendants leaned toward the veteran. "Would you like me to tell him what you just shared?" she asked softly. The veteran hesitated, then shook his head. "No, not yet. Let the boy have his piece. He doesn't need to know how much this means to me. Not right now." But the passengers couldn't contain their astonishment. What had started as a simple act of kindness now carried a sense of destiny, as if the universe had aligned just for this moment. And then, something even more remarkable happened. The veteran sat quietly for a few moments, his story lingering in the air like an unspoken challenge. Nearby passengers exchanged glances, some leaning in closer to share their own thoughts in hushed tones. The flight had transformed from a routine journey into something far more profound. It was the man seated directly across from the veteran who broke the silence. He was in his early 40s with a tired but approachable face. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. But your story really hit home. My grandfather served in Vietnam, too. He used to talk about how much it meant when people back home cared enough to help. Hearing what Fred Trump did for you, well, that's rare, too rare. Too, the veteran nodded, his lips curling into a faint smile. It's the little things, son. People don't realize how far a small act of kindness can go. Back then, I thought my life was over, but that man's generosity gave me a second chance. Across the aisle, the young mother chimed in, cradling a sleeping toddler in her arms. You know, my dad used to say the same thing. He wasn't a veteran, but he always told me that when someone lifts you up, even just a little, you pass it on. It's like a chain reaction. What Barron did today, it's proof that kindness still matters. The veteran's eyes softened as he listened. It's true, and it's not just about big gestures. Sometimes, just being seen, being acknowledged, can change everything. That's what Fred Trump did for me, and it's what his grandson has done for me again today. The passengers continued to share their stories, each one more heartfelt than the last. A flight attendant, visibly moved, sat on the armrest of an empty seat near the veteran. I wasn't planning to say anything, she admitted, but my brother served in Iraq. He didn't talk much about it, but when he came home, he told me that the people who stopped to thank him or helped him out in small ways, those were the moments that stuck with him. Sometimes those moments were the only thing keeping him going. The veteran nodded in understanding, his expression a mix of empathy and quiet pride. Your brother's right. It's the little things that keep you grounded when everything else feels like it's falling apart. In economy, Barron noticed a few passengers glancing back at him, their faces a mixture of awe and gratitude. He didn't understand the full context of what was happening yet, but he offered a polite nod to one woman who smiled at him. His gesture, though small, had set off a cascade of reflections and connections that no one on that flight could have predicted. The veteran turned to the flight attendant and said, You know, I've always believed that gratitude doesn't just stop with the person who helps you. It grows. Fred Trump helped me rebuild my life, and I've spent every day since trying to honor that by helping others. Today, Barron reminded me of that mission. It's funny how life works, isn't it? The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting everyone slightly, but the mood in the cabin remained steady. The conversations felt like a shared catharsis, as if every person on board was connected by an invisible thread of kindness, gratitude, and human resilience. And just as the plane began its descent, the most unexpected moment of all unfolded. As the plane began its descent into Newark, the conversations in first class quieted. The veteran sat with his hands folded, staring out of the window, deep in thought. Across the cabin, passengers exchanged knowing glances, some still marveling at the unusual turn of events. Just as the captain announced the final approach, the flight attendant, who had been listening earlier, approached Barron in economy. She knelt slightly to meet his eye level and spoke softly. I wanted to let you know that the gentleman you gave your seat to shared something extraordinary about your family. Would you like to hear it? Barron looked up from his book, his curiosity piqued. He closed the cover slowly, the title unreadable to those around him. Sure, he replied simply, his tone calm but intrigued. The attendant hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Years ago, your grandfather, Fred Trump, helped him when he was at his lowest point, she said. Your grandfather gave him a place to live and a job, expecting nothing in return. And today, you did something for him that reminded him of that kindness. For a moment, Barron didn't speak. His expression remained composed, but his eyes softened, as though the weight of the revelation was settling over him. He finally said, That's something, isn't it? The flight attendant smiled. It is. I thought you should know. As the plane touched down, the veteran stood, preparing to disembark. To everyone's surprise, he walked directly to the economy section, his eyes scanning the rows until they landed on Barron. The young man, now standing to retrieve his bag, looked up in surprise. The veteran extended a hand. "Young man, I wanted to thank you face to face. What you did today, it brought me full circle. Your family has a history of kindness, and you've carried that forward. Never forget how much these moments matter." Barron shook his hand firmly, his voice steady but quiet. "I didn't do anything special, sir. You deserved it." The cabin was silent now, passengers watching the exchange unfold with rapt attention. Some had tears in their eyes. Others wore small, thoughtful smiles. The connection between these two men, generations apart, felt like a living testament to the power of empathy and gratitude. As the passengers disembarked, many paused to thank Barron for his gesture. Others approached the veteran, offering handshakes and words of gratitude for his service. The mood was unlike anything anyone had experienced on a flight before. At the gate, the veteran turned once more before leaving, tipping his hat toward Barron. "You've got a good heart, son. Don't ever lose that." Barron nodded, his usual reserved demeanor softening just enough to show the impact of the words. As he walked toward baggage claim, he pulled out his phone and typed a brief message. He hesitated, then hit send. The text read, "Grandpa would have been proud of today." This story reminds us that even the smallest act of kindness can create a ripple effect, connecting hearts and changing lives in ways we never imagine. Gratitude, compassion, and empathy. These timeless values unite us and leave a lasting impact. In a world often dominated by headlines of division and conflict, it's easy to forget the profound power of human connection. We crave belonging, understanding, and the shared experience of being seen and heard. Sometimes, the most unexpected encounters can remind us of this fundamental truth, weaving a tapestry of empathy that can heal old wounds and inspire new hope. Think back to a time when a stranger's story resonated deeply with you. Perhaps it was a casual conversation on a bus, a chance encounter in a coffee shop, or even a story shared online. What was it about that story that touched you? Was it the vulnerability of the speaker, the relatability of the experience, or perhaps the simple realization that you weren't alone in your own struggles or triumphs? Our brains are wired for connection. When we hear a story that resonates with us, it activates a network of neural pathways associated with empathy, compassion, and understanding. We step into the shoes of the storyteller, feeling their emotions, understanding their perspective, and in a sense, experiencing their journey alongside them. This shared experience creates a powerful bond, a sense of belonging that transcends differences and fosters a feeling of unity. The story of Flight 247 is a perfect illustration of this phenomenon. A simple act of kindness, a young man giving up his first-class seat to an elderly veteran, ignited a chain reaction of shared stories and heartfelt connections. The veteran's revelation about the past generosity of the young man's grandfather added another layer of depth, weaving together generations and highlighting the enduring impact of kindness. But it wasn't just the grand gestures that mattered. It was the smaller, more intimate moments of shared vulnerability that truly transformed the atmosphere on that flight. The passengers' willingness to share their own stories, their own experiences of loss, gratitude, and resilience created a space of collective healing. The flight attendant's admission about her brother, the businessman's reflection on his grandfather, the young mother's echo of her father's wisdom. These were the threads that wove together a tapestry of shared humanity. This phenomenon extends far beyond the confines of an airplane cabin. It's the essence of support groups, where individuals find solace and strength in shared experiences. It's the heart of community initiatives, where people come together to address common challenges. It's the driving force behind movements for social change, where collective voices rise up to demand a better world. The world needs more connection, more empathy, more shared stories. Let's embrace the power of human connection to heal, to inspire, and to build a more compassionate world. What are your thoughts? Have you ever experienced the power of a shared story in your own life? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more inspiring content and insightful discussions.